Hey, welcome to this episode of Cloud Chronicles. I'm Andy McCaskey from SDRNews, and of course, we're joined by the official host of the show, Patrick Pushor. Pat, you're back from HP Discover.
Indeed, I think as are you, Andy. We were both there, and probably in slightly different roles. Me there with AppZero, kind of in the cloud partner expo floor area, covering the AppZero booth, and a little bit of dual duty on the blogging side, but then you certainly on the much more on the content creation side this go around.
Well, it's always an interesting and challenging week, but just full of opportunities. Now, I know that as you were there renewing a lot of acquaintances with HP people and people in the industry, you were focused on cloud. What did you see about, HP had this announcement about the Cloud OS that was opening up, and what were your impressions of those announcements, and what were the impressions of people that you talked with?
Yeah, so I think you're right. HP announced some extended public cloud functionality that is debuting soon, and they've got a bit of a promotion. If you're interested in getting some early access to that, you can. But it's really about extending their OpenStack-based cloud platform. My interest lies much more on the public cloud side of things, but I'm sure there are equivalent sort of progressions on the converged infrastructure, hybrid cloud, private cloud space. But in terms of the public side, yeah, they're doing a few things. They're doing increased instance sizes. So for those really heavy workloads, they're going to support those better here shortly. They're doing some data import capabilities. So if you've got lots of data you need to get into their cloud, that's going to be a little smoother. Both kind of unstructured data and VM imports, I think they're talking about supporting as well. So lots of sort of, nothing really revolutionary, but some great sort of added functionality as they go. And I think it's a balance between some of that getting back into the OpenStack project and some of that being proprietary to HP. I think as any service provider that focuses on kind of an open source platform, they're looking for ways to differentiate themselves so that the next person running OpenStack has a tougher time competing. So I think we'll see that over time with HP, where they have some services that are more proprietary to HP and some that are contributed back to OpenStack. They are a huge contributor to the OpenStack project. So I think we'll see kind of a balance of those two things.
Well, I understand that their ability to have larger instances was one of the things that they announced. Is this going to enable them to go after a different class of customer?
Yeah, I almost feel like those larger instances are more geared towards, I don't know if we call them legacy, but traditional workloads. I think when you're in the driver's seat in terms of authoring your application to be cloud savvy, let's say, to take advantage of that horizontal scale, you can almost, the size of the instance matters a little less there, of course, because you can spin up and spin down parallel instances and to do parallel processing very simply. So, I think the applications that'll benefit from the sort of bigger instance size will be the more traditional, big, heavy database kind of loads, the databases that maybe weren't purpose-built to run in the cloud. That's my impression, at least, and that's what sort of my customers are telling me. I think when you're building your application, you can sort of get around some of the instance sizing issues just with that scale potential. So for me, this is more of a play to support more traditional workloads.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would expect that bulk upload would fall into the same category. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. Again, if you're building your service, if it's going to be born on the cloud, you don't really have, the data is going to grow with the app. So you don't really have that need to sort of pull the data over. One big exception, of course, is if you've got a cloud application running somewhere other than HP Cloud and you want to bring it over. That sort of bulk data import may be advantageous or sort of strategic for you. The imported VMs, kind of related to the bulk data import feature, is interesting, and I don't fully understand sort of the rules wrapped around that. I don't expect you to be able to import everything. There's a reason you don't see a lot of desktop operating systems in the service catalog of public cloud providers, and that's mostly a licensing issue on the part of Microsoft. But things like that, I don't think you're going to see entire flexibility on what you can import in terms of a VM. But it's interesting to see that you will have that functionality at least in some form soon.
What role does the extended network capability offer as far as improving their overall offering in public cloud?
Yeah, I think it's this is a move to try and get functionally equivalent to some of the competition, because this is something that you'll see out of AWS and some of the more mature public cloud already. So now there's a way, if you go to Azure, for example, if you go to AWS, you've got some virtual private networking capability to sort of bridge back to your data center. And that sounds like part of what the networking advancements coming to HP Cloud will cover. Some of the other stuff is more around, public IPs versus private IPs within HP Cloud. Sounds like you'll be able to do more with that, maybe multiple interfaces per VM. That was something you couldn't do a short time ago. So it sounds like it's just generally getting a little bit better from a functional perspective. And then, of course, this virtual private networking will be a nice functional balance to be able to speak to those use cases they couldn't, where someone says, hey, I need to bridge my traditional data center with my cloud instance, and HP will be able to have that conversation now with customers.
Well, shortly before we've been so focused on HP Discover, we really haven't commented on some of the other major stories. Probably the biggest one has got to be the at least openness by the CIA to public cloud offerings, specifically AWS. Were you surprised by that?
Well, I think the news, at least in this past week, has been around IBM's protest of that selection process when the CIA, their whole argument is that the comparisons weren't really fair. The comparisons were weighed to, were slanted to weigh heavily in the favor of AWS, and quite appropriately, the accountability office of the government agrees with them. So I think we're going to see now a reopening of that process. I don't think CIA has really responded officially yet, but I think the verdict coming down will be, there has to be of course, because this is a government kind of decision, there has to be some transparency around the decision-making process. And, was this sort of tendered to Amazon without, enough due process to other competition? And IBM thinks so, and quite frankly, so does the accountability office. So we'll have to see how that goes, but it's a huge opportunity. Most people bill it around $600 million, so it's no surprise that other players want to have some sort of play sort of in that chance to win that business. And to me, it's really interesting. I commented that we don't really know for sure what Amazon's doing for the CIA. We don't really know what that design is yet. But most people are speculating it tends to look a little more like private cloud than it does public. And that's interesting to see Amazon chase that kind of business, because of course their whole messaging and their whole stance is that that any workloads fit for the public cloud. And we know in case of regulated business, data retention, data privacy, data security, there are some issues there, right? So it's interesting to see AWS potentially break their model of pure public cloud in pursuit of the CIA business. So we'll have to see, we're short on details, but we'll have to see kind of how it plays out if Amazon does win this business, and if they continue down this path, what it looks like in terms of an end solution. I'm sure interested to see it, that's for sure.
Have there been other major announcements from some of the other players, such as Rackspace or Microsoft, that have attracted your attention in the past few weeks?
I think this IBM acquisition of SoftLayer was interesting to me. It's kind of this really traditional scenario we see where a big provider, a big service provider, or a big infrastructure company acquires a much smaller, more agile solution. And now we wonder how good of an integration effort. First of all, what's the purpose? What is IBM really interested in SoftLayer? And we can banter a little bit back and forth about what that might be. But then if it is in fact the platform SoftLayer has built, the ability for them to serve in a real agile way, a real infrastructure as a service way, then it sort of begs the question, will IBM be able to learn from the sort of the less bureaucratic, more able to respond to quick change SoftLayer or not? And that's interesting. I think there's a technical, there may be a technical point of interest in the platform that SoftLayer has built. It's homegrown, so it doesn't really mesh with the OpenStack effort or sort of driver that IBM is sort of pushing. But there's some capabilities in the SoftLayer to do bare metal provisioning. Their platform does that quite well, and that may be something that IBM is interested in terms of flushing out the infrastructure as a service side with the ability to not only provision VMs, but provision bare metal servers. I think a lot of us think about the cloud as synonymous with virtual machines, but I don't think it really has to be that way, right? There are still some workloads that work very well on traditional hardware, high disk I/O, for example. We're seeing flash storage come into the public cloud with dedicated sort of IOPS and quality of service that way, which is great. But there's still some workloads that will benefit from being on traditional physical infrastructure, and SoftLayer has a great story there. So that could be an area of interest, but it'll be interesting to see just how well IBM can learn from SoftLayer, if indeed that is that is kind of the driver in as part of the acquisition.
Do you think that SoftLayer is going to be bringing along any premium customers that, for whatever reason, IBM wasn't able to address adequately?
I don't know. I don't think that's necessarily the case. If anything, not looking at specific customers, but looking at kind of the broader picture. If anything, IBM's already got the gargantuan enterprise customers they want. If they're looking at a play more into not quite SMB, but smaller enterprise, maybe, right? Maybe I think smaller organizations, again, who can respond to change better than the IBMs of the world, might attract a smaller customer who really needs that kind of quick change, quick response, self-service sort of scenario that IBM struggles maybe at times to provide. So if they're looking at that, if they're looking at sort of competing more on the AWS kind of side of things, maybe SoftLayer is a great choice. But again, it takes more than technology, and it'll be interesting to see if the culture can shift a little to, hey, let's drop a bit of the bureaucracy and let's get into this, rapid change, self-service, cloudy side of things to a greater degree. So it'll be interesting to see. I think that's the kind of customer that a SoftLayer brings, and whether IBM can learn to respond and serve the needs of that kind of customer, we'll have to wait and see.
Well, indeed. I was just trying to make a couple of notes here of things that I also found interesting at HP Discover. Of course, having a chance to talk with the people at Moonshot and understand a little more about the hardware side, that's really exciting. And I think just for pure interest, the autonomy ability to extract from very large data sets. Did you have a chance to take a look at either of those two projects?
I have in the past. I didn't this time around. Kind of had my hands full on the expo floor with AppZero, but yeah. So the Moonshot theory of having smaller, in this case ARM-based machines, many more of them in a rack, much more dense, but of course each one can handle a little less. They're not they're not these big beefy. They're kind of more purpose-built, smaller machines. It's interesting to me. I'm not really sure in terms of how that will go for HP. I think in some ways there are workloads that are well suited to that sort of infrastructure. As that begins to make its way to the public cloud, it'll be interesting to see if that's important or not. I'm not sure it is. I think we're getting to the economies of scale in the public cloud where we're going to care less about what's behind it sort of powering, and we're going to care more about how our applications are built to scale. It's almost going to be consume resources as needed. We don't really care about what's providing that service or that compute, as long as it's reliable and predictable, right? So whether it's a huge honking x86 server or it's a more modest ARM-based machine, you need more of them. I think that's going to become less relevant over time. It's going to be more in the application architecture than the horsepower behind it, but we'll have to see. I think that it's really appropriate. I think for some workloads, and for others, it's probably going to make a little difference.
Well, I was particularly interested in something I didn't realize was a part of it. Obviously, they had the ARM and the low power Atom type processors, but they also have other modules that can support GPUs or FPGAs that have been optimized for a particular application. And of course, I immediately think about video encoding and so forth, and it's going to be interesting to see how all of that shakes out. And of course, a lot of companies doing that sort of encoding in the cloud. So it's going to be interesting to see the outcome.
Yeah, exactly. In those purpose-built workloads you talked about, if you need something that requires a GPU, it sounds like that could be a really good story. But like you say, I just don't know. I don't know. I think working in the public cloud side almost every day, I get a little bit used to the fact that that's happening, and that there's more and more acceptance of the public cloud. But when I take a step back, there's still a ton of people who aren't there, and so this sense of purpose-built, more modestly right-sized compute, I think is interesting. And like you say, for video compression, for things that'll take use of these dedicated GPUs that don't maybe need the CPU power, but the GPU power is kind of interest. The lower power footprint of these things, there's a good fit there. I just don't know in the bigger cloud, especially public cloud ecosystem, if there is, but time will tell.
Time will tell. Okay. Speaking of time, we're kind of running short on time here at the moment. Patrick, thanks very much for joining us here. Next week, we're going to be taking a closer look at some cloud-related news. And Patrick, hope to see you back. Ofir should be back, and hope you'll be back as well. Thanks for joining us. I'm Andy McCaskey for SDR News.